So you can see I've got the Esprit gearbox stripped down for inspection, and the first thing I'll show you is the circlip. It was present, it's just a wire ring, and it was worn to the extent that you couldn't tell it was there. The input shaft could just be pulled in and out with no resistance. And this is the later design of input shaft, where there's no longer a square shoulder here, there's a taper. This was done to improve the strength of the shaft. And if the shaft is unable to move forward because the pilot bearing end is supported by a ball race, this never becomes an issue. But as I previously said, the Lotus uses a needle roller bearing, and that was what was installed in the Alpha crankshaft. So there's another problem. This shaft is installed with a reasonably stiff coil spring down the inside of the input shaft, and that bears on the end of the clutch shaft and would push it up against the circlip. And when the adaptation to the V6 was done, the circlip had already failed. There are pictures on the build thread for this this conversion that show the input shaft removed and this extension on the end. Normally there would just be, this diameter would be back here, and it's been extended to engage with the pilot bearing in the crank. And I think all of the work was done with the shaft pushed forward by the spring, which might explain the wear pattern on the splines. You can see there's a line here, and that's where the shaft was engaging with the splines on the input shaft rather than full depth as it should be. So that was going to be a problem on these splines. They would eventually have failed. But it also caused an additional problem. This was the Lotus solution to having the needle roller, was this nylotron bearing. You can see there's some cupping on the end of that where it's been rubbing up against the cage of the needle roller. But it's a little bit difficult to get the alignment right. But if I zoom in and line up on the face of the clutch face on the flywheel, you can see the spline only just comes to the edge there. I've just pulled it back slightly, you can see there's a gap. So that means that with the shaft all the way forward, it would only just be fully engaging the splines in the clutch disc, which means that with the shaft correctly fitted into the gearbox, I would not have full engagement on the clutch plate. Now fortunately this is reasonably easy to solve. The input shaft on a DS gearbox is 10mm longer, and I have fortunately found a new old stock shaft. It may still be a few millimeters short, but I have scope to thin down the adapter plate slightly. At 20mm it's quite generous, and 5mm off that, even a little bit more, you know, half-inch 12.7mm adapter plates would be quite common. That will be fine, but that is not the end of the gearbox problems. When I split the bell housing off to look at the situation with the clutch shaft circlip and also the differential bearings, I found quite a lot of sludge, brown sludge in the bottom of the gearbox, and some closer investigation has shown up some corrosion problems. And that's the second gear, and if I rotate the gearbox, see a lot of the teeth look fine, there are quite a few with the corrosion spots, and they're particularly that one that's actually relatively deep. And we also have the same thing going on with first gear. Third gear's not looking too bad. Fourth gear, yeah, we can definitely see problems with fourth gear. And if we come around the back to the fifth gear extension, well, you can see that's quite a lot of corrosion here, and although it's quite difficult to get in and see the gears, there's definitely some issue on the teeth. Now, if this gearbox was going to be used behind a standard normally aspirated 2 litre or 2.2 litre Lotus engine, we're talking 160 horsepower and 140 foot-pound of torque, and it would probably live for a reasonable period of time. But with the 220 plus of the Alpha engine and potentially 200 foot-pounds of torque, it's probably a little bit short-sighted to put this gearbox back in. Now, these gearboxes are not easy to find. All but 3 of the internal bearings are custom Citroen bearings, are very expensive, but I have very fortunately found a reconditioned gearbox at a very good price. I will, of course, unfortunately have to partially strip it to change the input shaft, and I'll have to convert the top cover, as it has the shift arrangement from an earlier car.